A recent study released by the Barna Research Group talks about how faith-forward CEOs are experiencing less burnout and greater longevity in their purpose and calling within the marketplace. On today's episode of the History Makers Leadership Podcast, I'm really looking forward to breaking down some more of the findings from that incredible research. All right, so Norval, we're continuing to look at this report that talks about leaders who have some unique satisfaction in their work, who don't experience as much burnout. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about some of their self-leadership practices, but I also want to look at some of their organizational leadership practices. There's some really interesting kind of different elements to how these faith-forward leaders operate within organizational leadership.
Yeah, that it's very interesting that what motivates their leadership, what their values, the top values that they lead, and again their faith-forward CEOs identify excellence as a top value, growth of the company, their faith. 34% of the leaders considered their faith to be a significant core value, or their religious practices as a significant core value. And so, as you can see, those are all other focused leadership values. But what is interesting, Daniel, is that there is a generational difference in the CEOs.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just at first blush, that makes some sense to me. Because when I think about, I'll never forget, there was a moment where I was listening. It was Global Leadership Summit. It was somebody who was speaking who just made this simple statement: "You're never leading one generation. You're always leading more than one generation." And as the gap between generations gets shorter and shorter, right? Like the number of years that the millennial generation are considered millennial is a little smaller than Gen X, which was a little smaller, which was a little smaller than the boomers, which was a little smaller than the silent or the builder generation. That increasing pace at which generations form creates a context where, as leaders, we're always leading multiple generations. From the moment I heard that from whoever it was that spoke that, I have always tried to register, okay, wait a second, what are the unique ways that I need to lead across generations, and how has that impacted? What were some of the kind of unique differences in this study?
It's interesting because some of the differences just indicate growth and maturity.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
For instance, baby boomers value humility at 42%. 42% of leaders value humility, as opposed to only 17% for Gen Z and millennials.
Okay. Yeah, that certainly, there's some truth there, right? When you're young, you're brash, you don't know what you don't know, and you're just kind of running after things, and all of a sudden you go, oh man.
You start growing up.
Or I think about how many Christian leaders I know that they find themselves, and you could maybe speak to this better than I could, Norval, but they find themselves in their 60s, their 70s, their 80s. They start looking around, they start realizing how many people didn't finish well, right? I mean, we talk about in our training, 70% of leaders won't finish well.
Exactly.
And that's an incredibly sobering thought.
And look at this. 48% of boomers and elders, which is what they're calling the builder, so
they're calling elders.
The generation above me. I'm a baby boomer.
Sure.
So 48% of them value their faith, their religious faith, in terms of a significant core value in their leadership, as opposed to 33% for Gen X, and only 25% for Gen Z.
So it sounds like there's actually a key mentoring opportunity there, where these boomers need to be as part of their leadership legacy, stepping in and mentoring those Gen X, those millennials. Norval, if we don't help to disciple the next generation of Christian marketplace leaders, we're going to be missing an incredibly important element to the way I think God intended for the church to impact the culture and community.
Absolutely. I see myself in this report because I remember 20 years ago when we started ILI, I was the practical guy.
Okay.
If you look at the materials, the ILI book, the parts that I wrote are the parts related to goal setting, related to stewardship, related to, and I wasn't as interested in. I always said I'm not the prayer guy. I'm not the I'm not so much. I love God and I have intimacy with God. And then all of a sudden, I start discovering spiritual disciplines and the practices of them, and start giving more importance to that in the context of my leadership as I matured. Today, I can say, man, I wish I had, just like I started working out at 40, I wish I had started investing more time prioritizing that core value of intimacy with God, of my faith in the context of my leadership and my work, then if I started earlier, I wonder where I would be. Yeah. It's the same thing. If I had just started going to the gym when I was 25 instead of when I was 40, I'd be in better shape. I'd be closer to my ideal weight and things like that. So it is definitely a tremendous mentoring opportunity.
Well, we talk about this a lot because of just our belief that to advance the gospel, the most important element is the local leader. And we care about the local leader. We want to equip and mobilize and strengthen the local leader. And I think stepping into that kind of mentoring relationship, particularly for these marketplace leaders that are in your generation, there's just such a desperate need. And I know leading a business is incredibly complex and difficult, and the thought of adding another thing to their plate could be completely overwhelming. But I love what one of our board members said. He said, "I'm in my legacy years." He runs. He is one of the largest employers in our current community, and he has hundreds of employees. But he recognizes that the legacy years are about something beyond the now, and he wants to invest in the next generation in some fundamental and transformative ways, and it's just so important.
And so it's interesting because I know him too.
Yeah,
and he's a Gen X.
Yeah.
He's not. He's a little
older Gen X, but
he's Gen X. But here's another important piece of the data that speaks to the importance of mentoring.
Okay.
Daniel, personal growth mindset.
Okay.
As a core value in leadership. Gen Z 30%.
Okay, so about a third.
Gen X 22.
Mm-hmm. A little less than a quarter.
Boomers 22. So what we have here is two generations, millennials and Gen X, that are, for whom personal growth is in the business and in leadership is an important core value.
Well,
so they want to learn.
There you go. They want to learn.
They want to learn. We have the opportunity to not to teach, but to mentor. Older generations have the opportunity to teach. And another core value that was high among younger leaders, very high actually, was creativity.
Now that's so interesting to me. There's a high element to creativity. They think that's fundamental to their leadership, to the organization that they're leading, into their organizational leadership.
42% for millennials and Gen Z.
That's nearly half. Norval, where do you think that comes from? Is that youth and naivete, or is that indicative of something else? Where do you think that comes from in the life of a leader?
I think part of this is generational. Part of this is actually contextual.
Okay.
We live in a day when creativity has really grown in terms of an importance and a core value in the environment, the broader culture that we live.
Yeah.
Where the ability to innovate.
Yeah. And the ability to be creative, I think, is more accessible now than maybe at any other point in human history.
And the freedom to be creative.
Yeah.
Maybe we lived in a more in the box eras in the past. Today is a more out of the box context.
Yeah.
Freedom to think out of the box.
When I think about creativity, though, I have to confess, I think some of, and I can be just as susceptible to this. I think some of my peers, there could be a moment where it's creativity for the sake of creativity, right? Where it's not driven so much by a desire to have my leadership express or to show real growth or transformation, but it's just I don't understand or I don't like the way it was done, and so I just end up kind of doing something new just because I want to do something new, and that. That can be damaging to multi-generational leadership, right? Because that then change really seems to be just a beating down of the past rather than a seeking to understand and then take practical steps forward.
Right. It's creativity and innovation not as a rejection of the past, but as a continuation of it.
That's right.
Standing on the shoulders
of giants. That's right. Yeah.
Building forward. Iteration. For the sake of perfection. I mean, we talk a lot about iteration because we're both fans of space travel and particularly some things that happened down in South Texas with regards to rockets and things like that. But that idea, the creativity that allows us to iterate until we get it right.
Yeah.
I think that's a value of the new generation. And
well, what leaders find valuable also can kind of reveal some of what they feel responsible for. And this research had some interesting results on what leaders find or what these faith forward CEOs feel personal responsibility for. Well, what were one or two of the kind of top things that they felt responsible for?
Here's an interesting fact. 80% they feel high responsibility for the vision and the mission of the organization.
Well, I mean that certainly makes sense, right? I mean, they're the CEO of the organization. They're leading. They're out in front. If they don't have responsibility for the vision and mission of the organization, it would be difficult.
They're
to
the ones.
Yeah,
they're the ones. They're the guardians or the gatekeepers for the vision and the mission of the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the second and real close is they feel responsible for creating a positive workplace culture. And I love it that they are these faith forward CEOs are worried about that, considered that, and work towards creating a positive culture.
I wonder how much of that is what some of that motivator is behind that, right? Like how much of that is really legacy of Patrick Lencioni and his work around the advantage and dysfunctional teams and successful teams and organizational. How much of that is that, and how much of that is again rooted in love for others found because of love of Christ. You know what I mean? I wonder where that kind of tension plays in.
Well, I think it because in some of the other questions they reveal that other-centered type of leadership.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that's that other-centered leadership is what motivates this high
element
focus
of culture.
Element of high focus of investing in the culture.
Well, and that makes sense. I remember in our first conversation in the previous episode, we talked through some of those elements of self-leadership, and some of those motivators were clearly and distinctly others-focused, wanting to make sure that their teams are valued and the like. So that
exactly.
makes some sense. Were there other elements here of what they felt were okay?
Productivity was the third.
Makes some sense.
At 71%. But what is interesting is, well, I guess vision and mission has to do with profit and all of that.
Yeah, it's got to do with the organization.
But again, if we go back to the purpose of the organizations, that their perception that their organization exists for the benefit of others, for the service, to serve community, to serve. And then here, vision and mission has less to do with money, more to do with being a positive influence in whatever environment they are. And so the productivity, which I guess that's the first time that the profits start playing a part, is only the third one.
Well, and I've got to be honest. I think any senior leader within an organization, for profit, not for profit, there's always the reality that people deserve meaningful work and meaningful pay for that meaningful work.
Exactly.
And that doesn't happen just by magic, right? I mean, there's a degree to which all of those leaders are going to feel that true weight of, well, in 2 weeks there's payroll again, Norval, and if the money's not in the bank, it's got to come from somewhere. And I can put in as much as I can put in, but there's a point where I don't have any either. And now we're all just trying to float.
So that's where the biggest worry, the biggest stress point, is profit, which is it's gonna show up, in one other chart where the CEOs say the highest ranking point of stress is profit, because all of a sudden, as you said in a conversation, off the mic when we were preparing for this, all of a sudden, the CEO is not only responsible for supporting his family or her family,
right?
But however many employees.
Well, yeah,
our friend from the community.
Yeah,
he needs to make his business work for over 500 people.
Oh yeah, well, and
families in many cases.
In many of those cases, Norval, and you start recognizing, wait a second, if I've got 100 employees and the average family's 4, well that could be 400 people very, very quickly. If I've got 500 employees, well, 500 times 4, you're starting to get some pretty massive numbers worth of impact. And that's why I know so many incredible ministries that focus in on those marketplace leaders saying, wait, this is a critical community that we can impact and touch, and equipping them to be more effective at reaching not only their employees, but also the community at large. As these leaders are leading in their organization as these faith-forward CEOs, this report also kind of started pointing to some other facts about stressors, about things that cause them pain or pressure. What were one or two of just those really high stress elements? We already know profit's one of them.
Profit's one of them. Interestingly enough, we talked about soul care. I was talking about self-care, self-leadership. Work-life balance is number 2. With 32% of the leaders saying a big stressor, significant stressor, is keeping work-life balance. Meeting stakeholders' expectations.
Oh,
that's kind of like that's a big one.
It's such a big one, Norval, because I think there are so many increasing expectations placed upon senior leaders, CEOs, in particularly within businesses, right? You got shareholders looking back saying, "Hey, I expect X amount of return, or I'm gonna pull out or whatever," and there's a just just reason for that. You've got employees saying, hey, I'm struggling. I feel like I can't find balance in things, and it's your responsibility to make me find balance in this. And so there's those pressures there. There's pressures on all those sides. Every the customer always coming going, hey, this isn't working the way it's supposed to, or this is right, or this is wrong, or I love that you have this, but why don't you have this, right? I'll never forget, there was a moment. I managed restaurants, and I was working at an Italian restaurant, and I had a customer that asked, I said, they asked for a recommendation. I said, well, what are you in the mood for? He said, I'll be honest, I'm in the mood for some Chinese food. I said, well, we're an Italian restaurant.
You're not going to get any here.
I mean, and I tried my best to find some way, but those expectations from all of those stakeholders can create such an immense weight and pressure. And of course, you also go home and can you turn off that switch? Can you make that shift back into the home life? I'm honestly surprised that those numbers are as low as they are. I bet you that has something to do with the faith-forward nature with which they're leading and operating. I think if you did that of a largely secular leadership context, the work-life balance for them, the shareholder or the stakeholder expectations would be far and above 30%.
Yes,
it would. My intuition just says that would be even higher on that list.
It's the influence of that faith, and that which we talk about faith in a superficial term. If you start going deeper, it's about trusting that God is the provider.
Mm-hmm.
Profitability belongs that variable is belongs to God. He's the one who's going to provide. So to the degree that a CEO can trust God to take care of that, if she or he takes care of the care, of the service, of the quality, and of the integrity and the character, it's probably why it's not as high as
one of the elements from this that I found really encouraging, right? They're asked this question, hey, what are the most critical elements to really building and sustaining a positive workplace culture? And at the bottom of that list was essentially narrative. At the bottom of the list was hey, it's not, most of those leaders didn't believe that a positive workplace culture is about saying all the right things in all the right ways, but that it was actually a product of so many other pieces of the puzzle. There can sometimes, I think, be a perception that when people feel like things are bad, well, they just haven't heard all the good news yet. If they just heard the right news, or if they just listened to the right source, then everything would be better. Well, the reality is no, people are going to feel the way they're going to feel. It has nothing to do with the story you're telling them. It has everything to do with the reality that they're experiencing. And so when we listen and interact with the members of our team and lead in that kind of a Christ-loving, Christ-centered way, I think we'll begin to acknowledge and see, wait a second, it's got less to do with the story being told and communicated about our success or failure, and everything to do with the realities about our success or failure. Truth will prevail.
Well, here's a proposal. Proposing a statement for you. You don't create healthy culture by trying to create a healthy culture. You create a healthy culture by being authentic and living your values and doing that. And in fact, the in terms of the tension that leaders feel, they feel more tension from performance indicators than from anything related to value alignment.
Okay.
They were relaxed about value alignment, about culture and all of that. They were concerned, their deepest concerns are with the external things, the profit and the productivity and all of that. Whereas they were less worried about the culture. They were not trying to build a culture. They were not trying to increase that particular area or stressed about it.
Yeah,
because that comes naturally from being authentic. And
I think that's probably a unique thing that exists for faith-forward leaders. And of course, we're talking explicitly about Christian leaders. This particular article kind of looked at primarily, it was 70+%, 75% Christians. But I've got to imagine it is that faith foundation that creates for them the framework for answering the question, how do I care for my people?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to care for people? When that is informed and answered by the Christian worldview and the answers of Christ, that creates a context where I can lead my culture because I know I know from Christ's example what that can look like and how that looks and what that servant leadership function and model looks like. And so those won't be the stressors. It'll be those external stressors that constantly apply a pressure to me.
You know, it's interesting. That takes me back probably almost 20 years to 2008, when somebody articulated our training he stated that, you know, core values, the deep core values that leaders lead out of, they're from the heart.
Yeah.
They're what you believe in your heart about God and about you and about your company. He said, well, those values, they influence your mindset.
Mm.
And so then your mindset, your thinking, your decisions, your strategies, which then control what your hands do. And he said, when you have the right core values in your heart, you will think straight. You know, your mind will think in a way that aligns with those values, those biblical values, and that will inform what you do with your hands, how you make money, how you manage your employees and your departments and this and that. And so I think what this study is showing is that everything that we see here on the surface level of organizational leadership comes out of whatever you believe in your heart. If you believe in your heart that the priority is making a profit, turning a profit, pleasing shareholders, that will inform how you treat your employees, how you strategize, and what you do with your hands. It all begins in the heart and begins with those core values.
Well, Norval, I really couldn't agree more. I think time and time again, both history and fact have shown us that forming the right habits, forming the right attitudes, having the ability to intuit, right, to practice intuition in our leadership is driven by values that rest at the heart of our life, at the heart of the reality and the practice of our faith, and that's what allows us to be effective. You know, one of the earlier elements in this report, it's talking about the most critical pieces to a healthy organizational culture. And you know, the number one thing was leadership. It's leadership. And when it comes to leading an organization, we need effective leaders. And when it comes to building effective leaders, I think we need the elements of Christ-like character. And I think that's the fundamental piece that shapes cultures, shapes organizations that are impacting cultures, and ultimately results in the one individual making an impact on that other individual's life for eternity. And that's the kind of thing that excites me about Christian leaders in the world today.
That's something we've been saying. It's so simple that it's deep. Leadership matters.
Leadership matters, Norval. It matters every day and in every way. And the most effective way to advance the gospel and the kingdom of God in any context is that local leader. That's why leadership matters. And so I'm excited for what God's doing in the midst of leaders around the world today. Listen, if you are part of that Christian leadership ethos, you find yourself a faith-forward leader, I want to encourage you. There are incredible resources at iliteam.org. There you can discover more about the 8 core values that we teach that drive the character of individuals that are reaching their nations for Christ. I think it'll be a great resource for you. Look, if this is helpful for you, will you subscribe? Will you maybe share share it with a friend. We want to grow in our ability to serve you as a Christian leader. So help us to know how we could best serve you. Comment, do all of those kinds of things so that we can help connect you into and get you resources that will help you grow in your life and leadership, ultimately making a kingdom impact in your business, in your church, in your community and culture around the world. Thank you.